On the morning of the 13th of June 1944, exactly 1 week after D-Day, residents of London were jolted awake by an unfamiliar sound. A strange buzzing noise, like a massive angry insect, grew louder and louder across the pre-dawn sky. At precisely 4:18 a.m., the engine suddenly cut out. Silence. Then, 20 seconds later, a massive explosion tore through Grove Road in the East London district of Bethnal Green. 6 people were killed instantly. The wreckage revealed no aircraft parts, no pilot remains, nothing that made sense. What had just hit London was something the world had never seen before. A pilotless flying bomb, traveling at over 400 miles per hour, carrying 1,870 pounds of high explosive in its nose. The Germans called it Vergeltungswaffe Eins, Vengeance Weapon 1. The British would come to call it the Doodlebug, the Buzz Bomb, or simply the V1. Over the next 10 months, more than 10,000 of these robotic weapons would be launched against Britain and Belgium, killing over 6,000 people and injuring 18,000 more. But what made this weapon truly terrifying wasn't just its explosive power. It was the psychological warfare built into its very design. The story of the V1 begins not in 1944, but years earlier in the minds of German engineers, desperate to find a way to strike back at Britain after the Luftwaffe's failure in the Battle of Britain. By late 1942, the Third Reich faced a strategic problem. Conventional bomber raids against Britain were becoming increasingly costly. German cities were being pulverized by RAF Bomber Command and the United States Army Air Forces. Adolf Hitler demanded a weapon that could terrorize British civilians without risking German pilots. The solution came from the Fieseler Aircraft Company and the engineer Robert Lusser, working with Fritz Goslau on a revolutionary propulsion system, the pulse-jet engine. Unlike traditional aircraft engines, the pulse-jet was remarkably simple, cheap to manufacture, and required no skilled labor to build. It had no moving parts in the engine itself. Fuel was injected into a combustion chamber, ignited, and the resulting explosion forced air out the back while simultaneously closing spring-loaded shutters at the front. When pressure dropped, the shutters opened again, sucking in fresh air, and the cycle repeated roughly 50 times per second, creating that distinctive buzzing roar. By December 1942, Colonel Max Wachtel of the Luftwaffe was appointed to command Flak Regiment 155W, a specially formed unit tasked with deploying what was officially designated the Fieseler Phi 103, but which everyone called the V1. The weapon itself was elegantly brutal in its simplicity. The V1 measured exactly 25 feet 4 inches in length with a wingspan of 17 feet 6 inches. It weighed approximately 4,950 pounds at launch. The pulse-jet engine, mounted on a pylon above the fuselage, could propel the bomb to speeds between 340 and 400 miles per hour at altitudes ranging from 2,000 to 3,000 feet. Navigation was handled by a remarkably crude but effective system. A simple magnetic compass for direction, an aneroid barometer to maintain altitude, and most crucially, a small propeller mounted in the nose that counted down the distance traveled. When the propeller completed a preset number of revolutions, it triggered a mechanism that put the V1 into a steep dive, shut off the fuel supply, and locked the elevator controls. The sudden silence as the engine cut out became the most dreaded sound in London, because it meant you had roughly 20 seconds before impact. The warhead contained 1,870 pounds of Amatol high explosive. The blast radius could completely destroy a row of terraced houses. What they didn't know was that Germany was simultaneously developing an even more advanced weapon, the V2 rocket, which would arrive without any warning at all. The launch sites were built in utmost secrecy across northern France beginning in late 1943. These weren't airfields, but rather simple concrete launching ramps, each aligned toward its target, with adjacent storage bunkers and assembly buildings. Colonel Wachtel's regiment established dozens of sites across the Pas-de-Calais region, the closest point to England, just 150 miles from central London. Each launch site, called a Stelling system, was designed to fire between 10 and 15 flying bombs per day. The V-1 was launched using a steam catapult system called the Walter Dampferzeuger. Hydrogen peroxide was mixed with potassium permanganate, creating superheated steam that propelled a piston down a 150-foot track, flinging the V-1 into the air with enough velocity to get the pulse jet engine up to operating speed. The entire process from arrival of the bomb to launch took less than 90 minutes. Allied intelligence had been aware for months that Germany was developing secret weapons. Royal Air Force reconnaissance flights over Peenemünde on the Baltic coast had captured images of strange, rocket-like objects. British intelligence officer Wing Commander Dennis Felkin analyzed photographs from April 1943 showing tiny cruciform shapes that appeared to be some kind of pilotless aircraft. Throughout late 1943 and early 1944, the RAF conducted Operation Crossbow, a massive bombing campaign against suspected V-weapon sites across France. Thousands of tons of bombs were dropped on concrete bunkers and suspected launch ramps. The campaign delayed the V-1 offensive by several months, but couldn't prevent it entirely. The first V-1 to strike London on that June morning in 1944 was followed within hours by 3 more impacts across the city. Over the next 24 hours, a further 9 flying bombs reached British soil. The attacks were initially sporadic as Flak Regiment 155, W, worked out technical problems with the launching system and dealt with the effects of Allied bombing raids on their sites. But by the 15th of June, the assault intensified dramatically. On that single day, 244 V-1s were launched toward England. Of these, 144 crossed the English coast, and 73 reached the London Civil Defence region. The randomness of the impacts added to the terror. Unlike the Blitz of 1940 and 1941, when Londoners could hear aircraft engines and anti-aircraft fire, providing some warning, the V-1 attacks offered almost no advance notice. The flying bombs arrived day and night, at any hour, in any weather. A mother hanging laundry, a shopkeeper opening his store, a clerk working at her desk. Anyone could be killed without warning when a Doodlebug's engine cut out overhead. Herbert Morrison, the Home Secretary and Minister of Home Security, faced an immediate crisis. How do you maintain civilian morale when death literally falls from the sky without warning? The government initially tried to suppress information about the new weapon, but this proved impossible as hundreds of impacts occurred daily across London and southern England. What the British defenders didn't initially realize was just how vulnerable the V-1 actually was to defensive countermeasures. The bomb flew at relatively low altitude and constant speed, making it a potential target for both fighter aircraft and anti-aircraft guns, but only if those systems could be properly coordinated. Air Marshal Roderick Hill, Air Officer commanding Air Defence of Great Britain, working closely with General Frederick Pyle, General Officer commanding Anti-Aircraft Command, devised a revolutionary defensive strategy. They reorganized Britain's air defenses into 4 distinct zones, stretching from the French coast to central London. The first zone consisted of RAF fighter patrols over the English Channel, where Hawker Tempest 5 and Supermarine Spitfire fired fighters, both equipped with powerful Rolls-Royce Griffin engines, attempted to catch V-1s shortly after launch. Pilots including Squadron Leader Joseph Barry of No. 501 Squadron and Flight Lieutenant Remy van Leerde of No. 164 Squadron developed specialized techniques for destroying the flying bombs. The standard method was to close to within 200 yards and fire a burst from the aircraft's 20mm Hispano cannons directly into the V-1's fuselage or pulse jet engine. Some pilots, when ammunition ran low, developed an even more dangerous technique. They would fly alongside the V-1 and use their wingtip to flip the bomb's wing, disrupting its gyroscopic guidance system and sending it tumbling into the sea or open countryside. The second defensive zone was a balloon barrage, stretching along the North Downs and manned by No. 30 and No. 40 groups of RAF Balloon Command. Nearly 2,000 barrage balloons were deployed, each tethered by steel cables at altitudes between 5,000 and 16,000 feet. The cables were designed to either sever the V-1's wings or foul its control surfaces, sending it crashing to Earth. This proved moderately effective, accounting for roughly 232 confirmed V-1 destructions, but many flying bombs simply flew under the balloon line at their standard cruising altitude of 2,000 to 3,000 feet. The third zone was where the revolution truly occurred. A concentrated belt of anti-aircraft guns deployed along the coast between New Haven and Dover. Initially, these gun batteries achieved poor results because the V-1s flew too fast for conventional fire control systems. Gun crews were achieving less than 1 destruction per 100 shells fired. What happened next shocked even the Air Ministry's statisticians. In July 1944, a massive redeployment operation moved hundreds of heavy anti-aircraft guns from positions around London to new coastal positions. The 3.7-inch heavy anti-aircraft guns of the 1st, 2nd, and 5th AA divisions were repositioned within just 48 hours. But the real breakthrough came from American technology. General Pyle had obtained from the United States Army dozens of the revolutionary SCR-584 microwave radar sets, combined with the M9 gun director, an electromechanical analog computer that could automatically calculate firing solutions and continuously track fast-moving targets. British scientists also equipped the guns with proximity-fused shells, a top-secret American development that used miniature radar transceivers inside each shell to detonate automatically when passing within lethal distance of the target. These three technologies combined, radar tracking, automatic gun laying, and proximity fuses, transformed the anti-aircraft batteries into devastatingly effective V-1 killers. By August 1944, the gun belt was destroying over 80% of all V-1s that came within range. On the 28th of August, a single day that stunned even the most optimistic planners, anti-aircraft guns shot down 94 out of 97 flying bombs that crossed the coast, a success rate of nearly 97%. Gun crews from the Royal Artillery's 113th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment reported that their 4 3.7-inch guns alone destroyed 11 V-1s in a single afternoon, using just 320 rounds of ammunition. Meanwhile, the fourth and final defensive zone consisted of fighter patrols between the gun belt and London itself, tasked with catching any V-1s that slipped through the earlier defenses. The effectiveness of the defenses forced Colonel Wachtel to adapt his tactics. Launch sites began firing at night, when fighter interception was more difficult. The Germans experimented with air-launching V-1s from modified Heinkel, H-111 bombers, flying over the North Sea, allowing attacks from directions not covered by the defensive gun belt. Between the 7th of July and the 5th of September 1944, Kampfgeschwader 3, a specialized bomber unit commanded by Oberstleutnant Werner Baumbach, launched approximately 200 V-1s from aircraft, primarily targeting the southern English city of Southampton and the massive military port facilities there. These air-launched missions were extremely dangerous for the German bomber crews. RAF night fighters, including de Havilland Mosquito FB aircraft equipped with AI, Mark VIII radar hunted the slow, low-flying Heinkels. Of the 1,200 V-1s air-launched, only 66 actually struck Southampton, while RAF fighters destroyed numerous She-111 bombers before they could complete their launching runs. The truth was far more complex than simple statistics suggested. While the British defenses became increasingly effective, the V-1 campaign was still inflicting terrible damage on London and causing exactly the kind of terror and disruption Hitler had demanded. By early September 1944, the Allied advance across France overran most of the V-1 launch sites in the Pas-de-Calais. On the 1st of September, British troops from the 1st Polish Armored Division captured the last operational launch sites near Abbeville. The relief in London was palpable. Duncan Sandys, chairman of the War Cabinet Crossbow Committee, announced on the 7th of September that, except possibly for a few last shots, the Battle of London is over. He was catastrophically wrong. Within hours of his announcement, the first V-2 rocket, traveling at over 3,500 miles per hour and arriving without any warning whatsoever, struck Chiswick in West London, killing 3 people. But the V-1 campaign wasn't finished either. What the British defenders didn't know was that Germany had been building an entirely new set of launch sites in the Netherlands, beyond the reach of the advancing Allied armies. On the 16th of September, V-1 launches resumed, this time from sites near The Hague and Delft, targeting London from a completely different direction. The defensive gun belt, positioned to defend against attacks from France, was now facing the wrong way. Meanwhile, Wachtel's regiment shifted focus to a new target, the Belgian port city of Antwerp. Antwerp became the second major target for the V-1 campaign in October 1944. The massive port facilities were crucial to Allied supply lines, handling thousands of tons of equipment and supplies daily for the armies advancing into Germany. Between the 13th of October 1944 and the 30th of March 1945, over 8,600 V-1s were launched at Antwerp and the surrounding area. Unlike London, Antwerp had virtually no air defenses initially. The city and port were devastated. On the 16th of December 1944, a single V-1 struck the Rex Cinema in the center of Antwerp during an afternoon showing. The theater was packed with Allied soldiers on leave, watching a film. The explosion occurred at 3:20 p.m., collapsing the roof and walls, trapping hundreds inside. The final death toll reached 567 people, including 296 British soldiers, 194 Belgian civilians, and 77 Allied servicemen of other nationalities. It remains the single deadliest V-1 impact of the entire war. Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Morgan, Chief of Staff to the Supreme Allied Commander, later wrote that the Antwerp V-weapon attacks threatened to disrupt our entire supply system and delay the final defeat of Germany by months. Allied engineers worked desperately to deploy anti-aircraft guns around Antwerp using the same systems that had proven effective in England. By early 1945, a defensive belt including American 90mm guns and British 3.7-inch weapons, all equipped with SCR-584 radar and proximity fusees, was achieving similar success rates to the English gun belt, destroying over 70% of incoming V-1s. The final V-1 to strike England fell on Orpington in Kent on the 29th of March 1945, killing 1 civilian, Ivy Millichamp, who became the last British person to die from V-weapon attack. The last V-1 launched against Antwerp was fired on the 30th of March 1945 from a site near Enschede in the Netherlands. In total, Germany launched approximately 10,492 V-1s against England, of which 3,957 were destroyed by fighters, 1,178 by anti-aircraft guns, 232 by barrage balloons, and 278 by a combination of these defenses. Of the remainder, some crashed due to technical failures, but 2,119 struck London itself, killing 6,184 people and injuring 17,981. A further 2,448 people were killed in other parts of Britain. Against Antwerp, 2,448 V-1s struck the city and surrounding areas, causing over 3,700 Belgian civilian deaths. The cost in German resources was substantial. Each V-1 required approximately 280 man-hours to manufacture at a cost of roughly 5,000 Reichsmarks, making it far cheaper than a manned bomber, but still representing a significant investment. The underground factory at Middelwerk, where concentration camp prisoners from Middelbau-Dora labored in horrific conditions, produced thousands of V-1 airframes alongside the more complex V-2 rockets. Historians estimate that at least 20,000 prisoners died in the production of V-weapons, more than the total number of people killed by the weapons themselves. The strategic impact of the V-1 remains debated. The flying bombs forced Britain to maintain extensive air defense systems that might otherwise have been deployed supporting the invasion of Europe. Thousands of fighter aircraft were tied up in defensive patrols rather than attacking German positions. The psychological effect on British civilians was severe, bringing back traumatic memories of the Blitz and creating a constant state of anxiety that affected war production and morale. However, the V-1 ultimately failed in its primary objective. It did not break British civilian morale, did not force the British government to negotiate, and did not prevent the Allied liberation of France. The resources devoted to V-weapon development and deployment, both human and material, might have been more effectively used producing conventional fighters and anti-aircraft ammunition to defend German cities, which by 1944 were being systematically destroyed by Allied strategic bombing. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, head of RAF Bomber Command, coldly noted that for every person killed by a V-weapon in Britain, roughly 300 Germans were being killed by Allied bombing of German cities. Colonel Max Wachtel survived the war and was never prosecuted for war crimes, despite commanding a unit that deliberately targeted civilian populations. He died in 1982 at the age of 78, maintaining until the end that he was simply a soldier following orders. Robert Lusser, the engineer who perfected the V-1's design, was brought to the United States after the war under Operation Paperclip and continued working on missile development for the U.S. Army, eventually helping design the Redstone rocket that would launch America's first satellite. Fritz Goslau, who developed the pulse jet engine, worked for the French aviation industry after the war. The British government preserved several unexploded V-1s and tested them extensively. The Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough launched captured V-1s to study their flight characteristics and improve British understanding of guided missile technology. The pulse jet principle itself, while revolutionary in 1944, proved to be a technological dead end for military applications. The engine was too loud, too inefficient, and too unreliable for practical use. Modern cruise missiles use turbofan or turbojet engines instead. However, the V-1 established the fundamental concept of the cruise missile, an unmanned, self-guided weapon that flies like an aircraft to strike distant targets. Every Tomahawk cruise missile launched since 1983 is a direct descendant of that first buzzing robot bomb that fell on Grove Road in Bethnal Green. Today, a restored V-1 flying bomb is displayed at the Imperial War Museum in London, suspended from the ceiling as if frozen in flight, its distinctive pulse jet engine pointing forward. The museum's display explains the weapon's technical specifications, but also honors the thousands who died from its impacts. In Antwerp, a memorial stands near the site of the Rex Cinema, listing the names of all 567 victims of that terrible December afternoon. Perhaps the most haunting remnant of the V-1 campaign can be found scattered across the English countryside, where dozens of launch sites still exist in northern France, their concrete launch ramps slowly being reclaimed by vegetation. In a bizarre twist of fate, the town of Kimki, where the closest point German forces reach to Moscow, Germany has installed one of these captured launching ramps as a memorial. And in the small village of Dymchurch on the Kent coast, sections of the sonic detection equipment and gun emplacements that formed part of the defensive gun belt remain preserved, silent monuments to the summer when robot bombs buzzed across the channel and Britain's defenders learned to shoot them from the sky with unprecedented precision. The V-1 flying bomb killed thousands, traumatized millions, and pioneered a form of warfare that continues to this day, when missiles strike cities around the world. arriving with the same mechanical indifference to human life that characterized Hitler's vengeance weapon.